cinquantaine de personnes en train d'arriver, le verre à la main, en train de se lancer des bouteilles, des insultes, j'imagine bien, puisque ça parlait en trois quarts anglais. Voilà, donc qu'est-ce que vous voulez qu'on fasse? On est saisi d'effroi à ce moment-là, on attend que ça passe et rentre tout.
The European Championships, held in cities across France, will be remembered for some of the most significant fan violence seen at any sports mega event this century. We've seen how football competitions can be significant sites of fan violence. Some games in this European Championship have been played against the backdrop of violence, but most of the matches are really peaceful. Most fans come to European Championships and World Cups to try and get in as many games as they can. But since 2004 and particularly the 2006 World Cup, there's been facilities like this laid on in city centres, fan parks where fans without tickets can congregate and people can watch matches and share space and time together in between matches. I'm Joel Rookwood, a senior lecturer in football at Southampton Solent University.
150 Russian fans at the centre of the violence at the England-Russia game on Saturday. They've been described as being well prepared for ultra-rapid, ultra-violent action. Let's speak now to Dr. Joel Rookwood. He's a senior lecturer in football business at Southampton Solent University and an expert on football hooliganism. Good morning to you.
Good morning, Claire.
Some of these fans pictured on the front of the Daily Mirror this morning, ultra-evil, 150 hardcore Russian thugs at large, very organised, wearing the same T-shirts and, you know, looking for a fight, essentially. Experts in the paper saying they're even backed by the Kremlin. What do you know about them?
Well, for these very violent hooligans, it's a sport. I mean, they're trained physically. I mean, they've been seen wearing MMA gloves and gum shields. They're, like you say, they're in these uniforms, the black T-shirts with the label of the club to kind of differentiate themselves between the Russians and themselves. They've got a very different profile there. It's a very literal interpretation of football hooliganism. It's very violent. The battles are arranged. They're very orderly. They're quite politically motivated as well, but they're very well prepared. And they're probably well funded as well. These don't seem to be impoverished fans. They seem to have quite wide resources available to them, but they're very well organised and they're ruthlessly effective.
I mean, it's incredible to look at the pictures of them, and you're absolutely right. I mean, they march like an army, these fans. You've been to football matches in Moscow. Do they behave similarly, in a similarly aggressive way on home soil?
Yeah, they are very aggressive, and on home soil they're far more dangerous, but they don't seem to fear the police. I mean, I've seen significant violence in Lille and not so much in Lens, but there is a concern between them. You know, the matches that are going to take place there, a very short distance between the places. Lens, the city, I think the population of the city is smaller than the capacity of the stadium. So I've seen violence as well between Ukrainian and German fans in Lille. And there was rumours of Russian-speaking fans in German tops fighting against Ukrainians in that city. So I think the Russians will certainly prioritise fighting the English rather than watching their own team play, because the battle for them is more significant to be won off the pitch, even more so than on it.
Incredible, really. I mean, what do you think drives them on? I mean, as I said, many are saying that there's Kremlin backing, they're far right. They were inspired by the football hooligans here in the UK in the 80s and 90s. What do you say to all of those claims, especially of state involvement?
Well, I mean, the English still represent the idea of the ultimate enemy. I mean, those who invented the culture of football violence. So for Russians, beating the English off the pitch is akin to teams beating the inventors of the game on it. But England has since built a culture of intolerance and limitation on hooliganism, and many England fans don't deserve the reputation that they've now inherited. And with the violence seen in Nice and Lille, and particularly Marseille, demonstrates the different approaches from and attitudes towards it and behaviour of the police. I mean, English victims of unprovoked attacks in Marseille expected protection, and the Russian hooligans didn't fear the police response, clearly. And the police themselves were quick to retaliate and even instigate problems by misinterpreting boisterous behaviour from England fans who've got a reputation for violence. But the Russians are the aggressors in all this, and they imagine it for trouble.
Okay, Joe, we'll have to leave. The line is dropping off, but we thank you for your time. Dr. Joel Rookwood there, Senior Lecturer in Football Business at Southampton Solent University. More on the build-up to that game and how the security preparations are going with Nikki and George on the way here on 5 Live Breakfast.
Here on BBC Radio Lincolnshire, we're talking about football violence. We're talking about the situation as part of the Euro 2016 tournament. Should Russia and England, and some of you saying this morning France as well, be thrown out of the Euros if the fans don't behave? Dr. Joel Rockwood, an expert in football hooliganism at Southampton Solent University, is with us. Dr. Rockwood, good morning to you.
Good morning.
We're seeing sort of scenes that I thought had disappeared, but what is it? You know, what is actually happening, and what happens to these people when they get together at somewhere like a tournament that we're having in France at the moment?
Well, you say you think it had disappeared, and that's because we've had a culture of legislative response, of changing the dynamics of policing, and that's not happened in other countries. They haven't had the response, the kind of official response to football hooliganism. So the hooligans in countries like Russia do not fear the police. They do not fear banning orders. So because of that, their behaviour is shaped accordingly. And we've seen a number of ingredients in a kind of concoction in Marseille. You've got local fans from clubs like Marseille. You've got the English, who are viewed as a legitimate target. You've got ineffective policing, and then of course you've got these Russian hooligans who are instigating most of the problem.
Are we saying, though, that the English fans are totally innocent?
No, clearly not. You know, I saw a video this morning of a fan getting seriously beaten up, and you know, you feel sorry for someone who's a victim of that aggression. And then I happened to see another clip, which was the 30 seconds before that, where that very same fan who just got beaten up was goading rival fans, probably Russians. So there are English fans who are actively seeking and involved in this violence, and you know, it's perhaps difficult to feel sorry for those, but there are a number of completely innocent victims who perhaps the press aren't really talking about, who are being picked off in bars, you know, attacked by rival hooligans, and they just simply don't deserve treatment like this. They expect protection from the police, and it's not been forthcoming.
It's interesting. This morning I've been using the word football fans, and people have said, no, call them hooligans, call them what they are. So some of these people go to the tournament, they have no intention of going to watch the football. They're there just for the violence, are they?
Yeah, I mean, I understand what your listeners are saying there, but I think a hooligan is a type of fan, and to say that they're not a fan, I mean, you can differentiate perhaps in that respect, but these people often care about the team and the country perhaps more so than peaceful fans, or they might have a funny way of showing it. And we are going to see further violence in this tournament. We've probably seen the worst of it in Marseille, but we are going to see further examples of it. And when England and Russia play 25 miles apart, you are going to have more fans involved in confrontations in Lille and Lens, and perhaps in the cities in between.
Is it happening between other countries, though?
Yes, I was at a game 2 days ago between Ukraine and Germany, and there was some significant trouble between fans of those two countries. And although I believe there were some fans of the German national team speaking Russian, so whether they were posing as German fans or not to attack the Ukrainians, I'm not sure, but that happened with no police presence in a central square in Lille before the match.
Why football, though, Dr. Rockwood? Why football? Why not rugby, other sports and things like that? Why is it focused predominantly on football?
Well, what football did that other sports didn't in the late 1950s, when there was an increase in away supporters, which changed the dynamic of fandom. Because you had 50 years of people just watching the home team, then you had an increase of away supporters. By segregating fans, you create that us versus you dynamic.
Right.
That didn't happen in rugby league.
So you've got the chanting across the terraces, you've got all this, and then it builds up into something that's more, and the passion overflows, and it turns into something totally different.
Exactly, and the segregation which was imposed in order to combat hooliganism has effectively created the dynamics for its escalation and its continuation.
Interesting point. Thank you very much indeed for your observations on that one. Dr. Joel Rockwood from the Southampton Solent University. BBC Hereford Muster, Elliot Webb here until 10 o'clock, 25-2 now. And the chairman of the FA, Greg Dyke, has written to UEFA to express serious concern about security arrangements in Lille. England and Russia's supporters will be there again this week. This, of course, following the violence in Marseille involving fans on both sides. And UEFA has given that warning that, well, we could both be chucked out if there's a repeat. Dr. Joel Rookwood is an expert in football hooliganism at Southampton Solent University, and he's in France. Good morning, Joel. What do you make of the scenes you've seen in France?
Good morning. Yes, it has been a surprise. I think there have been more significant problems than we were expecting. The level of violence, the amount of it, the number of different actors involved, if you like, as well. Some ineffective policing, some English fans involved in the violence, but it's principally been the French ultras and more so the Russian hooligans who've been responsible for it.
I thought we'd seen the back of all this. It seemed to have gone away quite a bit, hadn't it, by and large, this sort of mass brawling at the tournaments. Can anything really be done to stop it?
Well, there's evidence to suggest that there's plenty that can be done, and we're a case study as a country for how you can combat football hooliganism. The legislative developments, particularly from the Heysel tragedy, the various police responses, banning orders, they've all been really effective deterrents. That's not happened in other parts of the world, particularly in Europe, certainly not to the same degree. And the fans of the instigators often don't fear the repercussions of their actions.
So, are these people football fans? At the end of the day, from what you're saying, they don't sound like it, because if they're not bothered about their team getting kicked out of a tournament, they're clearly not fans, are they?
I mean, I think if you ask them if they care about it, I mean, someone is a fan if they say they're a fan, and it's very difficult to kind of impose a differentiation from that. It's easy to say that these kind of behaviours shouldn't go on. They feel, in many cases, that they are representing their nation, and England fans in this case are the ultimate target for hooligans from countries like Russia, because England effectively invented the phenomenon and the culture of football violence.
We were talking to another expert earlier on from another university who was saying that the fans are so passionate because they feel that it's their team, they're part of the game. Exactly as you said, they're representing their nation or their team, but they're not, are they? They're actually not. So are these people stupid? Are they thick?
In some cases, they probably are. But if you look at the level of organisation, it's actually been quite impressive. And if you make this a sport, and if you legitimise it with rules, there's been quite an effective display from the Russians. But we don't do that. Obviously, we don't think hooliganism is a sport. We think it's something that should be combated, reduced, and outlawed, and rightly so. But in countries where they don't think that, there's people will be waking up in Russia this morning looking at videos of Russian hooligans attacking English counterparts and smiling and thinking it's a great thing.
Do you think teams should be expelled if there's a repeat of this kind of violence?
I think when you have injuries, it's very different to when you have deaths. And I think if you have a death or two, then perhaps you can think, well, there's a level of severity in terms of the consequences. I mean, this tournament will be remembered for violence, but unless there are a significant number of deaths, I mean, 2 or 3, I mean, 1 death is far too many, obviously. But I think if it got to that stage, then you would have repercussions like throwing people out of the tournament. But because there's been a number of countries involved, the French, the Ukrainians, the Germans, the French, the English, it's very difficult, as well as the Russians, obviously, it's very difficult to say, well, who should be thrown out and exactly what gauge should you place upon that decision. Yeah, that's a difficult judgment.
Joel, we need to leave it there. Thank you very much, though. It's really interesting. It's fascinating. It's an endlessly fascinating subject, this, isn't it? Dr. Joel Rookwood, expert in football hooliganism at Southampton Solent University. Oh, it comes to something when you have to sort of
decide what level of, what number of deaths you have until you start expelling teams. It's extraordinary, isn't it?
You might find Matt doing some sport.
Yes, a big story tonight is that Russia have been told if there's any repeat of the violent scenes after their match with England on Saturday, they will be thrown out of the Euros. Let's talk to Dr. Joel Rockwood, who's studied the Russian ultras. He's currently out in France for the tournament. Dr. Joel, if they are thrown out, this could be very embarrassing for the Russians because, of course, they're hosting the next World Cup.
It could be very embarrassing. I just don't see a scenario where that's going to be the case. I think we would have to be talking about fatalities. I think if there's no loss of life, it's very unlikely the decision makers are going to make the move to remove the next host of the World Cup from this European Championships.
You've obviously, as I say, studied these ultras. We heard from the French prosecutor this week that he says they are trained, they are organised. Some of them are wearing fighting gloves. They had gum shields with them. They went there clearly with the express purpose of causing trouble. Is this normal, is what I'm asking, as far as ultra behaviour out in Russia is concerned?
Well, normal is quite a relative term, particularly in hooligan and stroke ultra context. And I think in Russia it is the norm, not perhaps to be so united, because it's very unusual for these Russian hooligan groups to come together to fight a common enemy. But England present to them the idea of the ultimate enemy, and they've put aside their allegiances and the way that England fans have been doing at international level for 3 or 4 decades, and they consider England to be the enemy to fight and the legitimate target in this championship.
And that's because they sort of model themselves on the sort of English hooligans from the 1970s, that kind of thing. England fans have inherited a reputation that they don't really deserve, particularly the younger generation of fans. The Russians are extremely well organised. This for them is a sport. The fact that they train for it, the fact that they probably don't drink before a battle, the fact that they have spoils of victory in stealing fans' flags, the fact that they, like you say, have gum shields and MMA gloves. This for them is a very serious and very well organised sport that they engage in. And just briefly, Joel, do you expect there to be more trouble then? From what you're saying, it sounds like this is going to happen again.
I think it's very unlikely we're not going to see further altercations. I think we have seen the worst of some of this violence. I'm fairly certain we haven't seen the last of it. I'm just about to go into a match in St Etienne between Iceland and Portugal. Almost guaranteed to be no violence there. So most of the matches will go ahead without fan violence. Some of them, and you can virtually pick the ones where there will be trouble, there is going to be trouble.
OK, Dr. Joel Rockwood, many thanks for coming on Radio 2 tonight. Very interesting story. I'm going to have to keep across that for the rest of the tournament.
I was almost horrified by that then. Yeah. Thanks, Matt. Thanks so much.
Now, this morning, the chairman of the FA, Greg Dyke, has written to UEFA to express serious concern about security arrangements in Lille, where England and Russia supporters will gather this week. We've been hearing your views on this all morning. Of course, it follows that violence in Marseille, and UEFA have warned the 2 national teams could be expelled from Euro 2016 if there's further disorder. Well, Dr. Joel Rookwood is an expert in football hooliganism at Southampton Solent University, joins us on the line now. Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning. Something that's emerged this morning and that perhaps is maybe surprising is that the intelligence that may have led the authorities to perhaps recognise the potential for trouble doesn't seem to have been in place. Is that something that concerns you?
Well, I think there probably was some intelligence. It's whether the French authorities choose to listen and act upon the advice they're given by the English police. I mean, English police stood next to the French in vests saying police with an English flag on the back of a high visibility jacket. I mean, they don't seem, from what I've seen, they don't seem to have had much of an impact on the response of the French, which simply hasn't been good enough. I mean, if the French had have properly tackled this in Marseille, we wouldn't be talking about it now. So it's the fault of clearly victims of fighting. But you also have to lay a significant portion of blame at the hands of the authorities, particularly the French police in the south of France.
Joel, the line's not great, but I'll just ask you one more question. I mean, that's fine, and we know that, you know, there's been a lot of blame sort of at the Russians, but the fact that it just seems to follow England everywhere, though, doesn't it? There's this mentality within a small minority of England fans that just leads to bother, it seems, wherever they go, and can that somehow be bred out of the game?
Well, they are a magnet for trouble, not only because they're visible and they're loud and they're congregating in loud and drinking, but I mean, so too do the Swedish and the Irish. But they're also kind of typically quite aggressive and perhaps even perceived as arrogant. And so in being so, they lay down a challenge, and one that's not often taken up these days.
Is sending England out of the tournament the right course of action, though? If there's trouble sending the team home, is that the right course of action?
I think you would have to have something really significant, and I'm talking loss of life, for that to be the likely cause. I mean, you know, whether I would do it or not is another issue, but whether it's likely to happen, I think you'd probably have to have this so soon. The authorities have to say something. Right. So clearly they're going to have the threat of expulsion. Whether that's carried out, I would be very surprised if it was.
Okay, thanks very much indeed for your time this morning.
Well, let's continue the conversation about football, but it's the ugly side, I'm afraid. The chairman of the FA, Greg Dyke, then has written to UEFA to express serious concern about security arrangements in Lille, where England and Russian supporters will be gathering this week. It follows violence in Marseille involving fans of both sides. UEFA has warned the two national teams could be expelled from Euro 2016 if there's further disorder. BBC reporter David Deacon was in Marseille for the match and says he will never see the game in the same way.
I would never, ever go and watch England away from home again. I'd never felt like that. My dad was obviously seeing the news bulletins and hearing them, and he phoned me, and hearing the worry in his voice, that will stay with me for the rest of my life. And when my girlfriend phoned me crying, making sure that I was okay, I love watching my team. It was a dream holiday for me. All I feel right now is guilt that I put my family and my girlfriend through that worry, knowing that I was there and in the middle of it.
Well, Dr. Joel Rookwood is an expert in football hooliganism at Southampton Solent University. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
I'll be honest, you know, seeing some of the scenes of the last couple of days, it takes me back to the terrible days, you know, the worst days of hooliganism in our memory. What appears to be going on, in your opinion?
Well, this is a bit of a perfect storm. You've got a number of ingredients, and just to simplify it by blaming one when there's at least four that are going on is as I've read from some parts of the press, is probably a little bit unhelpful. So you have got the Russians and the English. There's no question about that. But the French have played a significant role as well. The French ultras, particularly the Marseille fans who know the city really well, who've been attacking fans. Retaliation for some problems they've had at club level. Obviously, going back to France '98 and what happened in Marseille there, you've got the French police who aren't providing the protection to innocent fans from the English national team, and the likes of the reporter we just heard from there would be an example of that. Aren't protecting people like that. But then you've got the Russian hooligans who are hell-bent on attacking the English. Very well organised, very well disciplined, very well trained. These hooligans are, and then you've got some English fans. It probably will be a minority, those who would seek to engage in violence. And those four really have come together. And when you don't deal with the problem, and the police simply haven't, if this was allowed to go on for 50 hours, that demonstrates the fact that the police haven't dealt with the problem.
Can I just talk a little bit about, you mentioned there the sort of very well trained, very well organised Russian hooligans. They come deliberately to start a fight, they want to fight, they want it all to kick off.
Yeah, of course they do. For them, this is a sport.
Well, you say of course you do, but there's an awful lot of us will be going, what on earth? So yeah, go on. For them it is a sport. The fighting is the sport.
Well, I say course you do because you've probably seen the footage. If you put 10 typical Russian hooligans against the wall and face them with 10 typical English hooligans, it just wouldn't look like a fair fight. Because English hooligans, the profile of them physically is very different, and these Russians, someone who's 5'4" and doesn't weigh much, isn't going to be, considered to be a kind of legitimate part of the Russian gang. Someone who's 6'4" probably would. So these fans or hooligans who are, they travel with MMA gloves and gum shields, they wear uniforms, they're really well organised, they're brutally effective, and that doesn't reflect what we see in British hooligans.
So, if there are genuine fans who are booked, who are there ready for football, what is the advice that you would give? What can people do to try and avoid trouble or to stay safe? Is there anything that, from your expertise, you could say that might help people?
Yeah, and that's a really important question. When groups of fans think we won't stay with the main group, we'll go off in a separate little bar, they're the types of scenarios where people can get picked off. And it often, depends on where you are, but it can be safer to stay with the group, even when that group is potentially going to be intense on violence. But for fans at this tournament, the safest place to be is at fan parks. So I was in the Parisian fan park for part of yesterday before watching Ireland play in the Stade de France, and that fan park was open, I think, for 10 hours. So for 10 hours, which is the majority of the day, you can be in the fan park, you can drink, you can watch football, you can socialise. And 95% of this tournament is peaceful interactions between normal fans, but we're hearing about the 5% considered newsworthy that's violent, and understandably so.
I was going to say, you can't sort of dismiss the newsworthiness of unconscious, bloodied fans being pulled out.
I've watched football in 70 countries. I've been to 140 countries, and I've watched the last 4 World Cups, and this is unprecedented in terms of the level of violence and how. So it certainly is newsworthy. But I don't want to detract from those normal fans who are following, who are the majority. We need to protect those. The police and security forces in France need to be urged to protect those. And the safest place for them to be housed and for them to be based is in the fan parks themselves.
There are a lot of people who say the safest place is to watch it from home. That's the sad truth,
Yeah, of course there will. But I mean, I wouldn't let this put you off. I mean, what we saw in Marseille will be talked about in 20 years, not because it was reflective of what happens every week, because it wasn't. So for England fans thinking, I won't go there, I will understand that kind of mentality and that response. And there are plenty who will give Russia the World Cup in Russia a miss from that point of view, I'm sure. But football will remain a safe sport to watch in virtually all circumstances for English fans after this tournament, and probably for the most part during it as well.
Dr. Joel Rookwood, then expert in football hooliganism at Southampton Solent University. He's in France at the moment. He's in France then watching some of the games and also, of course, watching the violence. It's a shame when the headlines are not about the football, when football's on the front pages, but for all the wrong reasons.